This is Eyes on Africa News and online at eoanews.com, and I'm your host, Hermela Aragawi. Today, I want to take you to the Horn of Africa, where two neighboring countries, Kenya and Ethiopia, are marking a new era of cooperation and African solidarity with a Pan-African mission. Kenya's new president, William Ruto, was in Ethiopia last week in a trip that was watched closely and with awe by many Kenyans and Ethiopians. Photographs of Ruto and Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed show the African leaders looking like old friends, touring landmarks and announcing historic deals. Those deals include an Ethiopian wheat export agreement and bringing Safaricom, Kenya's largest telecom company, to Ethiopia. Here's Kenyan President William Ruto at Safaricom Ethiopia's inauguration.
This event is a beautiful celebration of the character, strength, and promise of the deep relationship between Kenya and Ethiopia, which dates back to the birth of our republic 6 decades ago. It testifies to the deep brotherly ties, exemplary neighborliness, and effective partnership that have characterized the essence of the excellent special relationship between our two countries.
The self-described brotherly trip happened with the backdrop of the ongoing conflict in Ethiopia. It's been nearly 2 years since the Ethiopian government has been fighting armed insurgents that are occupying the northernmost region of Tigray. Many Ethiopians have blamed the West and the so-called international community for demonizing Ethiopia and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed while pushing propaganda that favors the TPLF insurgents. So was Ruto's showy show of solidarity a message to the so-called international community? Here's Kenyan-American journalist Karanja Gashesha.
And I'm sure it's not lost on him that his actions, his visit, his very outwardly sort of show of brotherliness to Ethiopia and to Abiy Ahmed specifically is going to be looked at and analyzed right across the globe.
Also, a major development during the trip, former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta skipped African Union-led peace talks between Ethiopia and the TPLF insurgents. Later, Kenyatta followed up with a statement asking for clarity on the structure of the peace talks, which he referred to as a Pan-African effort to end the conflict. What does Kenyatta's move mean, and what can we take away from Ruto's trip to Ethiopia? Coming up, Kenyan-American journalist Karanja Gashesha joins me from Nairobi, Kenya, for an analysis on these questions and more. It's a fascinating conversation you don't want to miss. Take a listen. All right, Karanja joins me now to talk about what this recent trip and the deals that come out of it may mean for the relationship between the two countries and the two leaders. Karanja, welcome to the show. This was a very interesting trip to see photograph the relationship, or what appears to be the relationship, between William Ruto and Abiy Ahmed. Very similar personalities in a sense, at least on the surface, smiling, generally young leaders. So when you look at some of the pictures and the deals that came out of it, what are some of the questions that come up for you, and what do you make of it?
Thanks for having me, Hamela. Yeah, a lot of questions come up for me, actually more questions than answers. And as you said, these two leaders, they sort of display, definitely went out of their way to display this very outward display of bromance, right? And both young, both intelligent, they're both referred to as Dr. Ruto is a doctor of philosophy. He actually, by the way, completed his PhD while he was deputy president and actually had to redo a paper. So it wasn't like it was just handed to him. A very interesting character, a very hard to read character. So, and I'm sure it's not lost on him that his actions, his visit, his very outwardly sort of show of brotherliness to Ethiopia and to Abiy Ahmed specifically is going to be looked at and analyzed and what's the word, digested and, and dissected right across the globe. So, and what I understand about Ruto is that there's nothing that he does that is by accident. And at the same time, he always likes to stay a step ahead and keep people guessing. So, of course, the meetings were extremely significant in that they signed the PPA, the power purchase agreement between Kenya and Ethiopia, which appears to have been a deal that was already underway, but you would never have known that before, right, under Uhuru Kenyatta, because it seems like it was all done behind the scenes. And I have a sense that Ruto would have been doing it very specifically on camera in front of the world's cameras as a new president that knows and understands that the whole world has trained its cameras on him, right?
Right, and I
So
think
this
that
is
point
quite.
is your point is really so poignant, I think, because right now, when Ethiopia is facing a lot of pressure from the West, from the UN and the Security Council to negotiate or to make peace with the TPLF insurgents, and are sort of the country's painted in a certain way, and the leader is painted in a certain way during this war, it does seem significant that President William Ruto would make such a public display of their relationship. And I mean, it looked very friendly. I know it's politics, but when you're looking at the photos, these look like two, brothers that get along very well, that've known each other for a long time. So I think that seems so significant, that the public nature of it. You said that the former President Uhuru Kenyatta would probably didn't make any public or many public displays, at least during this 2-year conflict in Ethiopia, right?
No, and I didn't know about this PPA, for example, that was underway. Clearly, it was underway. So I didn't know anything about the deals. Like there was nothing to show things that were happening very directly with Ethiopia in that sense. So I feel that Ruto in his trip would have done that very specifically to demonstrate something to the world. What that something is, I'm not sure, but I think he even moved it up a notch, right? But he turned it up a notch by in his speech where he referred to Abiy Ahmed as a genius. Again, there's not a single word or action that Ruto does by accident. He knows what he's doing. He knows that that's going to be read and heard across the globe. And so I do believe that he's sending a message. Now, of course, immediately after that, we see that former President Uhuru then withdraws from the peace talks, quote unquote, in South Africa. That then leads to the AU postponing the Ethiopia peace talks, right? And the AU didn't give too much of an explanation as to why. Uhuru explained that it was because of a clash of schedule. Like, I don't know what could be more important than, peace in the Horn. But I can't help thinking there's something happening behind the scenes that we do not understand. Now, whether, of course, Abiy Ahmed and Ruto didn't just speak about Safaricom and the PPA, they spoke about Tigray, they must have spoken about the peace talks, of course. So I can't help wondering whether President Kenyatta pulling out isn't somehow something that Abiy Ahmed might have co-signed. I am at it is not clear, of course, to me as a analyst watching as to what end that would be. But one of the things that's very notable when he was withdrawing is he requested, and I'm going to have to read here because it is very specific, his request for okay, let me just read this. However, in the interim, as you consider the possibility of another date for the peace talks, I would be grateful to receive further clarity on the structure and modalities of the talks, including but not limited to the rules of engagement for all the interlocutors invited, the retired president wrote. Now, to me, that seems it's a significant request or demand, whatever you want to call it, from the former president, and and of course, again, it's not clear to what end. But I get the feeling that perhaps the international community had just demanded that there be peace talks, and now the leaders are saying, well, what are the parameters? So to me, this appears again from completely from blind analysis to be something that is being orchestrated and something that's being coordinated and synchronized, choreographed behind the scenes between the three leaders together. At first, of course, it looked very awkward, Uhuru just withdrawing at the last minute because of a schedule clash. But his request seems to me to be the thing that makes it seem not so disorganized and haphazard.
Right. I mean, without saying too much, because we are in the middle of a very complicated conflict, I do share that suspicion with you in the sense that this, my hope is, and I think a lot of people's hope in the Horn of Africa is that these leaders really do realize that the future of Kenya, the future of Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Sudan, the Horn of Africa in general is intertwined. I believe that's actually what one of the cabinet ministers in Kenya said after the President Ruto's trip to Ethiopia. And so there is this sort of recognition, or at least more progressed recognition, that these countries are better off working together. And it may just be that former President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya was not necessarily acting on its own. I think initially, like you said, it seemed a little awkward, that it sounded like he just forgot about something that he had scheduled when this was obviously a very important thing. But his questions are also not crazy. I mean, the way the peace talks have gone, it doesn't seem like there is a lot of structure, and it hasn't gone anywhere, probably partly because it's not clear what the two sides are trying to do, or if the TPLF is even willing to negotiate at all, or if it's looking to get everything that it wants before it negotiates, which is what it's done so far. It creates these preconditions that are completely just illogical to me, and then that makes it difficult for the Ethiopian government and the TPLF rebels to get to the table for peace. So a really interesting point about former President Uhuru Kenyatta's decision not to show up to the so-called peace talks in South Africa. I want to talk a little bit about some of the deals that came out of this trip, or at least that were announced in this trip. Some really major issues or major announcements here. Safaricom, Kenya's largest telecom company, is now newly operating in Ethiopia. It launched its mobile services there as Safaricom Ethiopia with 10 pilot cities, and the company is expected to add an additional 14 cities by next April. Safaricom's the first private telecom company to operate in Ethiopia, and state-owned Ethio Telecom has until now enjoyed a monopoly there. So we, generally speaking, anecdotally speaking, talk about how great the connection in Nairobi and Kenya is in terms of mobile services. So we're hoping to get a little bit of that consistent connection that you guys have. What do you make of this deal?
Well, we are using that connection right now here with me here in Nairobi. So I do hope that wish for that for Ethiopia. Of course, all of it is significant. I do think that with that, of course, that is a purely a business deal, right? But even as they sign business deals that are purely business, and I don't know if you can ever remove politics from international business, but you know what I mean? Like in this sense, this is not energy. It's not, this is a private company venturing into Ethiopia. And it's not, for example, the wheat deal, for example, which is far more political and far more significant in the background of Russia, Ukraine. This one is purely a business deal. But even as they sign a purely business deal such as this, I can't help thinking that the two leaders sitting down, even if there were no other deals, the PPA or the wheat deal, sitting down together and having this coming to fruition must think to themselves, wow, why didn't we do this before? And as they sign that, I can't help thinking that they would be thinking and saying to each other, and we've got to do more of this, right? Because this is a massive deal. They can see the numbers in front of them. They can see what the analysts are projecting is going to be the benefits for both countries, right? In terms of revenue, in terms of services, in terms of movement of information, and what many other aspects. So even if this was being done in a vacuum, I can't help thinking that they would be sitting there thinking, hey, we are neighbors. Why haven't we done this before? But then, of course, when you throw in the other deals, which I'm guessing you're going to talk about, and so I'm not going to preempt you, but I'll say when you think about the other components, the PPA and the wheat, of course, they sitting across from each other, they must think, wow, like they must draw them to the geopolitical considerations of that and what it means to be either very closely aligned and speaking in one voice or the opposite of that, right? So it's significant on so many levels. And did you want to
Yeah,
just
yeah.
move on to the
Absolutely. I just want to say a couple of things to what you said. Yeah, I think, up until now, like I mentioned, Ethiopia's Telecom, Ethio Telecom is the company, has been state owned. And one of the issues with a lot of companies in Ethiopia being state owned under the TPLF is that that sort of profit and money was easily stolen by those in government and wasn't really spreading to the people. I mean, just at least in terms of business and business stakeholders. So there is, and I know there's some downsides to privatization, but there are some upsides that will. I don't want to use the word trickle down because that's been so politicized, but privatizing certain segments of the companies in the country appears to be a good thing in terms of the general economy. I mean, one of the things that economists David Steinman and others have said about Ethiopia's economy is it was this sort of sub economy that where the TPLF controlled all of the money that came into different sectors, and then they decided what went down to the people or to different stakeholders. So that does seem to be a big deal in terms of changing directions for Ethiopia and the way that it operates its economy, and just the whole idea of African countries doing business with each other. Another thing that's coming out of this Safaricom deal, according to Safaricom Ethiopia CEO, is that they're launching a mobile money service that will be rolled out in a few months. That's a beautiful thing because a lot of companies that are operating, sending money in Ethiopia are Western companies like Western Union. So it really doesn't make sense if you're having concerns about the West and the way that they're meddling in your country and supporting opposition groups or appearing to provide tacit approval at the very least to opposition groups. It doesn't make sense to then allow them to make money off of the people in your country or your diaspora. So there are some really huge implications, I think, of this deal. So I just wanted to add that before we move on to another major thing, wheat. Ethiopia and Kenya have reached an agreement for export of wheat grain from Ethiopia to Kenya. This to me seems huge at a time where actually for ages I think we've talked about Africa being food secure, and this is sort of your expertise. I know. So talk about how you view this deal between Ethiopia and Kenya.
So yes, of course, this is very exciting for me. As you say, food sovereignty, as we is the term we are now using, as opposed to just food security, because as one of my guests on the spaces pointed out one time, you can have food security in prison, right, but still not be sovereign. But yes, food sovereignty is my baby, and so this is a really massive. It's massively important, and of course, massively of great interest to me because of of my interest in food sovereignty, and not just food sovereignty, but in the production of food sustainably and preferably, using organic materials, organic fertilizers. But that's another whole conversation. For now, I'm excited, in whichever form it's coming, because of course, in the aftermath of Russia, Ukraine, the fact that we can just get our grain right next door is massively important. It is such a much greater, a much shorter distance to travel, right? So it cuts costs in so many ways. It is the type of wheat, there are all kinds of different types of wheat, and the type of wheat being grown in Ethiopia is wheat that is, unless it's imported, but I'm guessing it's the native type of wheat in Africa, which is more suitable for the region. It's more suitable for the diets. It's more suitable for, a whole range of reasons why using native grown seed and grain is important. But of course, it's I think the biggest aspect of this that is the greatest impact of this is the reduction of dependence on grain from Ukraine. It positions the East African region as a region that is independent of West, East, whatever you want to call them, and that is within its own region, able to accomplish, and first of all, to accomplish food security, and also to expand regional trade and regional expansion. So it's very exciting and it's very significant. And I'm really looking forward to Ethiopia is pushing to be the #1 exporter of wheat, and presumably looking to capture the whole African market. And I'm excited that Kenya is the first place that this is happening, for so many other reasons that outside of the geopolitics. In my farming spaces, we've spoken about the importance of wheat to animal feed, for example, and the fact that um, there's shortage of animal feed, not in Ethiopia, in the northern Kenya region, and this is going to be so important for farming in general, because wheat and wheat byproducts are used in so many other things in addition to flour and and the stuff made for human beings to consume. There's potential for organic fertilizer being created from the waste from wheat. There's animal feed, like I said, which is massively important. And all of these elements have been previously imported, and oftentimes from Ukraine, Russia. So it's very significant for those reasons. It has serious geopolitical implications. And of course, the next one that we are moving on to, the power as well, is it falls under this category.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about this power deal. Like you said, it seemed to be underway before the new president of Kenya, William Ruto, got into power about 2 months ago now. But like you said, it was made very public, the deal, when he came to Ethiopia, or went to Ethiopia last week. What is in that deal, and what's the significance of that deal?
So in this deal, there's the agreement, the PPA, establishes a 500 kilovolts transmission line between Ethiopia and Kenya. And it is massively important for Kenya, and is said to be providing affordable energy. And I'm going to quote here, to an estimated 870,000, up to as little as, or up to 1.4 million, as little as 870,000 or up to 1.4 million Kenyan households, of which 18% will be located in rural areas. The importance of that, of course, is that it's very difficult to get electricity to rural areas. And I'm guessing in this case, it would be to rural areas in the northwestern and northeastern regions of Kenya, which are actually so much closer to Ethiopia, and much easier to deliver energy to from Ethiopia than from, say, Nairobi. So this is massively important for Kenya. And then, of course, in terms of trade for Ethiopia, it is important because of the revenue that it presents for Ethiopia. It also presents the opportunity to test drive the infrastructure that allows the exportation of this of the power that is being generated by Ethiopia, presumably from the GERD. And I apologize for not having had that actually checked through. But it will be interconnecting not just Kenya, but also, the whole East African power pool that serves countries all the way up to Egypt, Sudan, Kenya, Egypt, and presumably we'll go to Uganda as well, and Somalia and other countries in the East African region eventually. So that is very exciting. And by the way, also very notable, the former energy minister in Kenya, the former cabinet secretary for energy, her name is Monica Juma, is now, who was in Ethiopia with Ruto, she is now going to be Ruto's national security advisor. And so it is significant. She traveled with Ruto to Ethiopia. She will be his national security advisor. So she traveled, of course, and she was the one who was tasked with having the discussions around the energy deal. But that because her new role is going to be national security advisor, she would also have been involved in the talks around the discussions with the TPLF. So, and she's a very shrewd woman. She's a very quiet woman. She never made waves as a cabinet secretary in her previous positions. She was cabinet secretary for foreign affairs at one point. Then she was cabinet secretary for energy. And before foreign affairs, she was, I think she might have been a senior government official in the foreign affairs docket, in the foreign affairs ministry, but has maintained close ties with Ruto and would have close knowledge with the Ethiopia TPLF crisis. And so it is quite significant. And by the way, she came from Uhuru's cabinet. So there is a close connection. And so that leads me to continue my speculation that this postponement of the trip by Uhuru and this demand for structure and modalities of the talks with TPLF, I suspect that this woman whose name doesn't ever appear or never shows up, never makes waves, has a hand in it. And I would so love to be able to speak to her at some point, whether it's going to be while she's in government or after, to find out what hand she played in it. And
It's very
it's also
interesting.
intriguing.
It's so
Yes.
intriguing. I mean, I'm almost getting goosebumps, honestly, because it really does feel like, or appear to be that these leaders, these African leaders, are really putting their country and their people first, and and working around all the external pressure that is happening, and doing so by working together, which is what you and I and so many of others have been talking about in terms of having African cooperation. Actually, Ambassador and Dr. Monica Juma was the cabinet minister I mentioned earlier, but I didn't mention her by name, who said after her trip to Ethiopia that our destiny as Kenya is inextricably linked to that of our neighbors. So that is exactly the kind of spirit we have been embodying with the hashtag no more movement. This idea that you can't have one country in Ethiopia thriving while its neighbors are not doing well. So it's just really good to see them articulate that. And Ambassador and Dr. Monica Juma was one of about, I think, two women that were seen walking around with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and President William Ruto during the last trip. the other one being the president of Ethio Telecom, Frehiwet Tamaru. So very interesting to get a little background on her. These, two leaders are it's early. It's too soon to say too much, but when you look at their backgrounds and sort of the moves that they make, they seem to be really great partners. The William Ruto has his PhD, rather Abiy Ahmed has his PhD in peace and security, and William Ruto has his PhD in plant ecology. Abiy Ahmed is known to have a passion for agriculture and prioritize that. Some people say almost to a fault during certain crisis times, but peace and security and food security. I mean, what more do you need for a country to thrive, right?
And one more exciting and interesting tidbit is that William Ruto was once agriculture minister under the former president Kibaki. And it was known that his ministry was the best run, most competently run ministry when he was agriculture minister. And he brought a lot of innovation to the ministry at the time and to agriculture. He is very, very passionate about agriculture and about agriculture as a driver for not just food security, but also the economy. So they are so aligned therein. And I can't help thinking that the moves that have been made and even the withdrawal from Uhuru from the talks and the subsequent AU postponement of the talks, to me, what it appears is that the East African leaders said, hey, we are going to take this and we are going to take control of this. We are going to take ownership of this. We are not just going to run along with whatever schedules you had set for us. We are not going to just run along with the terms that you had set for us. We are going to reset. So that's what it looks like to me. It looks like a reset of the whole conversation and restarting the conversation from a position of strength, of saying that we are the leaders, we are going to take control of our region and, in the case of Ethiopia, of our country. We are not going to run along with whatever other people are doing or saying or suggesting. And so to me, it honestly looks far more, I have a different vision of it from the way I looked at it in the beginning. In the beginning, it was just confusing, it wasn't clear. And even in the Kenyan media, right now, they haven't figured out what to make of it. So it's very interesting. It's very funny watching Kenyan media sort of flailing about. And, the only thing coming out is memes out of social media right now. But I think the more that I look at it, the more that it appears to me to be the works of seasoned politicians, both politicians and diplomats, kind of taking control of the narrative. And of course, there's a lot of hope in that. In that statement from me, is that is what I hope is going on. But from all how shall I say it? From all angles, that's the only thing I can make of it. That's what it appears to be to me. And of course, I hope that is the case.
Absolutely. I think from the Ethiopian perspective, it has an impact already because it's a time where, Ethiopia and particularly Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and this New Yorker piece where the author alleges that he got this exclusive, visit to Abiy Ahmed and like paints him as this total caricature. And they've been doing that with the prime minister for much of this conflict. And it's the way that the Western media tries to paint him and what he actually is like is just so
Mhm.
different. So I think this trip and having Kenyan President William Ruto show up, be public, and I mean they look good. They look good. Like on the surface, they look like
You gotta
two.
say
You know
they
what I
do.
mean? They look great in their suits.
Yeah.
African politicians. They've got the charm. They're visiting. They're doing what any Western politician at the highest training would do. They're going to visit schools, they're visiting the science and the new science and technology museum in Addis Ababa, and then they're signing some historic deals. So it really pokes a hole in a very visible way of this idea that these African leaders don't know what they're doing, or that they're puppets of the West, at least in this limited regard. So I think it's really important at a time where there is active conflict in Ethiopia and there's so much pressure from the West. I mean, literally, the State Department was having these planes, secret planes, flying into Tigray to do what exactly, we're not sure. And they've got the general of the TPLF's Adkan on phone calls with think tanks like Heritage Foundation. So it really undermining the elected Ethiopian government. So I do not take this trip and sort of what it signifies and the Kenyatta element and all of that lightly. So the last question I'm going to end with is just, coming off the heels of the Kenyan president election about 2 months ago, when we talked then, we did an interview then, where we were trying to understand why former President Uhuru Kenyatta would co-sign and endorse Ruto's opponent, Raila Odinga, as opposed to Ruto, because they had worked together for a very long time, and whether that was a sincere co-signing or it was some sort of reverse psychology that Uhuru might have been playing. Any new thoughts on those relationships 2 months in?
These leaders definitely keep us guessing and keep us on our toes guessing. So new pieces come in, right? So with Uhuru's postponement of the trip to South Africa for the quote unquote peace talks, of course, at first it just looked awkward, as we said in the beginning of this. And then later on, you see that he made demands, and the demands actually make a lot of sense, right? And then the AU proceeds to postpone the talks, which to me appears to make sense in the sense that, well, we want to sit down. If the former president of Kenya is asking for these modalities and structure and and clarity, then maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and actually think about what those are. So then it starts to look like choreography. And so that's how these two have acted for the whole of the last 4 years. And by these two, I mean Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. Uhuru Kenyatta makes these what appear to be crazy moves, and then the impact, well, let me put it this way. It's never clear what he's doing, though, and it's never clear what the purpose of it is from when looked at with the naked eye. It looks like he's doing the opposite of what Ruto might want him to do. One thing that is unmistakable, however, during during the campaigns and what resulted in during the elections, is that the impact of what Uhuru has been doing in every instance seems to benefit Ruto. So his crazy sort of endorsement of Raila made no sense. And there was back and forth. People would examine every move and they'd be like, no, but this looks like, because, for example, during the selection of the running mate, it really looked like Uhuru was just throwing the Raila campaign into chaos. He presented like 3 possible running mates to him, which didn't help matters, right? And then in this instance, but again, the impact was that Ruto won the election, and on the day of the inauguration, the bromance was in full display. Like the two guys, when they encountered each other, could not look happier. Like this did not look like somebody that was not happy to be handing over to William Ruto. In the same way, this week, he pulls out of the talks, and people are like, including politicians on Ruto's side, are like, well, so big deal. The former president is not going. He's the former president anyway. We can send another government official. Ruto never responds, never tells anybody to shut up, right? And then we see this very sober. I mean, at first it looked like the guy was just hungover, right? And then we see this letter, and it's the exact opposite of that. It's very sober, and it makes a lot of sense. And so the impact is always significant, and significant in a positive way, in the way that I would hope for it to be. I don't know that we'll ever know what those machinations were. And I think from watching this campaign, what I realized is that as much as I am a political watcher, an avid political watcher, and think of myself as a political analyst, the one thing that I will never understand is politicians. And so we can analyze them, we can write about them, we can talk about them. I think that they are a different kind of animal with a different kind of acumen than all of the rest of us. I don't know whether it's not a type, it's a type of intelligence, a type of acumen that I just feel like is only bestowed upon politicians. So it's impossible to understand the exact workings, the machinations, what is going on. But one thing that I can guarantee is the impact is always very clear. And in this, on this occasion, I feel like I can already see the impact. I can already see the direction that this is heading in. And what it looks like to me is a reset, a taking of control of the narrative and the situation. So yeah, I mean,
It is
I think they'll keep us guessing. I
fascinating.
think they enjoy
Yeah.
it. It's
Yeah,
very
yeah. And you
fascinating.
know
It's
what?
more
It's
exciting than Game of Thrones.
a little, hopefully a little less blood, but yeah,
Right.
absolutely. I think just it's fascinating to have a leadership that is operating in a sophisticated manner, but for the purpose that is positive for the countries and the people, as opposed to external powers. And like you said, we're not really sure exactly what's going on in the inner workings, but very interesting points that you pointed to in terms of the results. Always lately appear to be positive in terms of what's going on with Ruto or the former president Uhuru Kenyatta, and that's sort of what anyone can ask for, whatever the optics are, if it's resulting in peace and security for the Horn of Africa and the larger region. It's a beautiful thing. Always such great insight, Karanja Gashesha, Kenyan American journalist. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything that you want to plug or promote, or where can people find you?
Well, you can always follow me at The Brief Scoop. That is my journalism website. And also where I hold farming spaces as well as spaces on geopolitics on Twitter and Twitter Spaces. And the site is thebriefscoop.com, www.thebriefscoop.com. Follow me and come through to the farming spaces, to the geopolitical spaces. We hold spaces literally all week at this point. And it's always a good time. It's always so much fun. And really, thank you for indulging me in this, because it was really so much fun getting to analyze and sort of air out my thoughts in out loud, and especially with the back and forth with you, sort of even have the ideas expanded. So this was actually a lot of fun. I enjoyed it so much.
I agree. I agree. Very interesting times we're living in terms of African politics. All right, Karanja, thank you so much for your time. See you soon.
Thank you, Hamela. Have a good evening, afternoon, wherever you are.
Thanks for listening. Eyes on Africa News is powered by Mela Media, a nonprofit 501(c) founded in 2021 to bring you the news out of Africa from the perspective of the African people. EOA News is here to challenge age-old, destructive, dehumanizing propaganda about Africa and her people. To support our work, you can go to www.eoanews.com and contribute there, or subscribe and become a member at patreon.com/HermelaTV. That's patreon.com/HermelaTV. Thank you so much for your support. EOAnews.com. This is the real Africa.